This is the new 2023 Ghost and Phantom 2. One of the best LEGO Star Wars sets to come out of 2023, and in my opinion, probably one of the best LEGO Star Wars sets of all time. And as you guys can see, I've already modified it quite a bit. Now, I didn't do very much work on the outside, besides the obvious, but I did do a little bit of tile work on the top of these panels to make them a little bit smoother and hide a lot of the studs that they had exposed. And then on these back panels towards the engines, on top of the tile work on top, I did actually extend the panels out using some slope bricks towards the rear. And this small extension might be pretty weird to some, considering it's not very canon accurate, but I just thought it looked cool, so I went ahead and slapped them on there. And speaking of canon, before we go all the way into these mods, I didn't do all of this to make the ship more canon accurate. Now, some of the mods happen to be canon accurate, but the goal wasn't to make the ship accurate to what it looks like in a TV show. My goal was just to have the version of the Ghost that I wanted. And then just beneath these extensions on either side and near the engines, I just added a few pieces in there to make it a little bit more greebly. And then above that, but underneath our Phantom 2, I added in a tiny bit more greebling and piping detail in here as well. And with our Phantom back on there, before we head up front and check out the big one, we're going to head underneath the ship and see the little bit of work that I did down there. And down here, I went ahead and slapped an extra layer of bricks on the bottom to help thicken it out and make it more level with the cargo bay up at the front that we'll go over. And then I used these slope pieces on the side to help better smooth the transition from that angled piece down into the bottom of the ship. And I do have the 3 landing gear that the Ghost has in universe, but you probably noticed that I had a 4th one built in the back here. And this is only here because the ship is so back heavy now that if a tiny bit of force is pushed back there, the entire thing will tip over. So even though it kind of kills the look, I really need the 4th landing gear on here to keep the ship upright. And now that we're done on the bottom side, we'll quickly cover these 2 larger structures on either side of the gunner seat before we head into the cargo bay. And on these builds up front, all I did was add on a few brackets to give it a little bit more depth and detail. And then I swapped out the normal studs for some translucent yellow ones so we can give the Ghost the headlights that it has in universe. And now, just in between and beneath our headlights, we can head into the fully functional cargo bay. And this was a mod that I was going to try no matter what. No version of the Ghost that we've gotten has been large enough to actually accommodate the cargo bay. And I knew at the scale of this set, I wasn't going to be able to make a proper cargo bay like we see in universe that's large enough to hold a few minifigures. So instead of using it for minifigures, I just decided that we could use it for some actual storage and use it like a cargo bay with some cargo crates. And this design we have now is ultimately the best and my favorite one that I've come up with so far. But it went through quite a few changes, so let's head back to the past and we'll see where it all started. Alrighty guys, here we are the next morning, and as you can see, I made great progress. We actually have a cargo hold down here that holds one of the larger crates. Let's see if I can get that out with one hand. There we go. But it does fit one of these larger crate pieces just fine. So I do have a working cargo hold, but I'm just not very sold on the look. I think it's a bit too outcroppy, if that makes sense. It just doesn't look fluent with the rest of the ship design. And while it wasn't pretty, that first prototype was actually going to have the largest capacity cargo hold that I was going to be able to make, fitting that larger crate piece, but it was just too damn ugly. And there is actually one more version that I posted over on my Instagram page before this video, so if you want to see some of the BTS and the in-progress photos of all my alternate builds and mods, you should follow me on there. But like I mentioned, this version that we see now is by far the best. It's by far the most secure version of the cargo hold. It looks pretty good on the Ghost as well, and it's got a decent cargo capacity. And right now the Ghost is currently transporting 2 of these smaller 2x2 crates with an extra custom bit of cargo that I made myself. And if you really want to, you can also finagle Chopper in there. And in order to accommodate this cargo hold, I did actually have to modify the turret itself quite a bit, but it still functions exactly the same from the original set. And the entire assembly still slides in and out all the same, locking with those clips at the back. And I of course had to change up the build for the guns, entirely removing that side-by-side sliding play feature. And now this front cannon actually looks much closer to what we saw in the 2014 version of the Ghost. And the cannon can of course still rotate and pose all the same. And some of you guys might have already noticed that this dome piece might look a little different. That's because it's just 1 plate higher than the original set. Now I hardly noticed the difference from the original set, but I have had this mod applied to my Ghost for a few days, so you guys might notice it just a little bit more. And while I did remove the mechanism that fires the spring-loaded shooters, and they are inaccessible now, I think spring-loaded shooter pieces make for great missile launchers or proton torpedo launch tubes, so I just went ahead and left them on there. But other than that, that pretty much covers everything I did on the outside of the Ghost. Now we can finally head inside to our overhauled interior space. And inside you can see we have the entire Ghost crew enjoying all the new amenities and modifications that have been made, but it's going to be a little hard to film like this, so I'm going to go ahead and remove some of these larger panels at the front to get a better look inside. And in order to get these panels off, because I added these brackets on the headlight builds up front, we're actually going to have to peel off this first before we can take off these larger panels on either side. And now with those panels off, we can take a much better and much easier look at the inside of the Ghost and everything I packed in there. And the pilot seat hasn't changed very much. I just added those control panels on either side of the seat, and I was going to add in an actual seat build or some sort of backrest, but it just made the area a little bit too tight, so I went ahead and left it empty. And the gunner seat and this entire assembly is unchanged from the original set, like I mentioned. The interior section is exactly the same with those controls on either side and the joystick up at the front. And then just behind Hera, we're going to peel off to the right side here and check out this small little command station I built. And this area has arguably seen the largest improvement from its original design. It used to just be a bunch of control panels haphazardly placed about, but now it's an official little command terminal. It's just made up of a few control panel pieces tucked into that front wall there, and it does come with a little seat that does technically rotate, but it's just on one jumper plate, so it's a little bit of a weak connection. And I don't know if any of you guys have noticed by now, but one thing I really like doing with a lot of my builds is offsetting things on jumper plates. I don't really like it when things are just placed directly on the studs all the time, so when I can, if I can offset something a little bit to give it a little bit more depth and detail, I'm going to. You can see I did that with the chair, and then with this small build just behind the chair. And this tiny build is actually a small little astromech port for Chop so he can plug in and control the ship. And now on the opposite side from this command terminal, we have the sleeping quarters. And the sleeping quarters are made up of a small little bed build that are of course offset on some jumper plates, with a storage crate just underneath the bed for any extra supplies, and then a small storage shelf behind the pillow. But right now, it looks like that's where Jason is storing an action figure. And despite the bed's small size, it can actually fit your largest minifigure in the set, that Mon Calamari pilot, even with the larger panels back on top. And then at the end of the bed, we have a small fold-down chair for any extra crew members who need to buckle in. But we'll go ahead and fold up this small chair, and then we'll move into my favorite part of the interior space, the couch. And this area, along with the rest of the interior space, actually went through quite the change during one long modding session. So let's do a little bit of BTS footage and see where this all began. Doing a little bit of late night modding here, and this is my current version of the Ghost. I haven't recorded any footage for it, so this is the only footage that's gonna probably exist of this version. But I have this command center that you guys might see in the final video up front, which is really just a ton of control panels to create a mini command station. And then over here I just did some work to remove the sink and the storage container to free up that interior space, and then I managed to move the sink over here underneath the bed, and that piece is actually bent out. Let's go ahead and fix that in there and turn it back over. So I've put the sink back under here, and then in the back here I used some leftover pieces from my Hoth medical chamber from a few years ago to create this bed. And while I really like this area, I'm starting to think that I could better use it to create that L-shaped couch that we see inside the Ghost in Star Wars Rebels. And then I can go ahead and shift the bed into this empty space up here. Now it sounds like a great idea, but it really is a ton of effort and it's incredibly late at night, so it might be a tomorrow project, but I really think it's going to be a much better use of the interior space back there to create that classic L-shaped couch and then maybe squeeze in something else. But we'll see how that goes. It's almost 1 in the morning and there are a ton of pieces around me and my mind is kind of mush and I'm sure I'm not really talking that well, so we'll see what happens. And it looks like my late night theory crafting paid off because I think we have a much better utilized living area now. And this is easily my favorite section of the Ghost. I just love how everything came together so perfectly. The couch with the storage crate and the hollow table in front, and then I even managed to keep in that original sink. Now it's a little hard to get to and a little hard to get a shot of, but it is still there, just tucked into that wall. And just like the sink from the original set, I also kept that storage crate along with the Melu run that's built on top. And then inside we just have a few supplies for the crew members of the Ghost. And behind the crate there's a small shelf for a few refreshments, and then you might recognize those headrest builds from the Ambush on Ferrix set. While I was digging around building this couch, I came across these in one of my parts containers from my old Ambush on Ferrix mod video, so I decided to repurpose them here. And they fit perfectly, being some small little headrest or backrest for the crew members of the Ghost. And up on top, I guess these empty studs up here are also some storage shelves because I went ahead and tossed 2 bottles of water up on this side. And as we've been seeing, we of course have the hollow table just in front of the couch. And as you saw earlier, I also created a small little hologram build, made out of a few clear pieces as well as a few translucent light blue studs. It looks like the Ghost crew is charting their course through space at 3 different points. And then besides the hollow table, I really quickly want to point out that you can actually have your minifigures sitting on the couch with the roof on, including that tallest Mon Calamari minifig. And speaking of the roof, let's go ahead and toss that back on, because the last mod we have to go over is actually inside the gunner seat. It's not very much, just up at the front I added a few controls so the gunner can actually control the guns. And then at the back I made a very small and simple headrest or backrest build. And that pretty much covers the entirety of the Ghost, but now it's time to move on to the Phantom 2. And unlike the Ghost, the mods that I did to the Phantom 2 were actually meant to be canon accurate. And I know this set's based on Ahsoka, but I'm a Star Wars Rebels fan first and foremost, so I decided to model my Phantom 2 off of this artwork from Star Wars Rebels. And I didn't really do a whole lot with the Phantom 2, but I think it's enough to make it look noticeably different. On either side of the cockpit, I swapped out the blasters for a little bit of a smaller blaster build that's on this clipped connection. And then on the right side, I have this circular tile here only when I don't have Chopper's head attached, just to make it look like there's an empty astromech port. but if you remove that piece, you can still attach Chopper all the same. Inside the cockpit, I didn't really do much. I do just have Hera's Calicori stored in there, which we'll take a quick look at the end. But on the top fin, or the spine of the ship, I did rework a number of these pieces to give it a more pronounced dark gray stripe like we saw in that artwork I showed. And then on the sides, I'm pretty sure I changed up a few of the plates and the tiles, but they're such small changes that I did over a week ago that I don't really remember. But I know I added in this larger triangular plate on the back here so I could work in a tiny bit more of this yellow orangish color. And I was really hoping to use a 1x1 tile for this rather than a rounded tile because I think it would continue that orange stripe a little bit better. But I didn't have any regular square ones, so I had to opt for a circular one. And then on either side of the Phantom, just underneath the engines, I added in 2 small plates to give the body of it a little bit more of a full look. And you don't need to worry about adding in these extra plates on the top and bottom because the Phantom 2 still docks to the Ghost all the same. And with our Phantom reattached, I think that just about covers everything that I did to the Ghost and the Phantom 2. And really quickly, before we head to an outro, we're going to go over a mod that I don't typically do to my sets, and that's a minifigure mod. Like I very quickly mentioned when we were going over the Phantom 2, I had Hera's Calicori tucked inside the cockpit. And for those that don't know what this is, the Calicori is just Hera's family heirloom that she's kept in her family for generations, so I decided to replicate it in Lego. And it's obviously oversized when put in a minifigure's hands, but I'm really happy with the way it turned out. I got a few suggestions from you guys over on Instagram for a few different pieces I can try out that'll do in the future, but for now I think this works. And with that little bit on the Calicori, I think that officially covers everything that I did to the Ghost and Phantom 2. Let me know your thoughts of all these mods that I did to both ships down in the comments below, and I unfortunately don't have PDF building instructions available for this build, because it would be pretty inconvenient and impractical for me to rebuild the entire Ghost just for a few of these mods that I did here or there. If there's a lot of support for these mods, I might be able to make some PDF building instructions for some of the larger assemblies like the cargo bay or the couch or something on the inside, but I don't think I'd be able to do proper instructions without just rebuilding the entire Ghost or buying a new Ghost and recording myself doing the mods to that. But I hope you guys will take some good inspiration from this video and maybe apply some of these mods onto your own Ghost or your Phantom 2. This has been one of my favorite mod projects in a long time. If you look at my channel, it's been a while since I've been consistently modding sets. I've been doing alternate builds for a while now, and this definitely got me back in the groove of it, and I couldn't be happier with the result. So make sure you leave your thoughts down in the comments below, and if you'd like to support the channel and the builds that you see, you can support me over on my Patreon page. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time. Peace, fellas.